will be steering our discussion today. Thank you, Martin. Martin is joined by Maritza Curry, who is Head of Data at BNP Paribas Personal Finance South Africa, or commonly known as RCS. So Maritza was also part of our series last year, and Maritza, I'm so pleased that we managed to convince you to come back. Thank you.
Didn't take a lot of convincing, Kerry.
Thank you for saying that too. Welcome to Emmanuel Kalunga, Head of Data Science and Business Intelligence at Order In, Yolanda S, Data and Analytics, or DNA, Capability Leader at BSG, and finally, Stuart Jones, Director of Projects at the Center for Analytics and Behavioral Change, and Stuart is also founder and director of Vibrant Research Agency. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing each of our speakers because you would have had the opportunity to read about them on the slides. And obviously what they do will no doubt come up in our conversation. But before we start, I'd like to quickly go through the order of proceedings. So if possible, please keep your video on, especially when you ask a question, you're more than welcome to. And while the webinar is underway, please keep your mic off. There will be time at the end for questions, but by all means, please pop your questions in the chat box throughout, as Martin and myself will be keeping an eye on the chat box, and we will address the questions as we go so we don't lose any momentum. So really that's it for me for now. And Martin, over to you, and again, sincere thanks.
Thank you so much, Kerry. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. From my side, an absolute privilege to be here this morning to share the room with a really interesting panel. I have some questions that I have prepped that I would like to pose to the panel members, but I do encourage you, as Kerry has said, to share your questions in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that, and in the end, there will be enough time for you to speak to the panelists as well. Emmanuel, I'm going to start with you. I have this three-pronged approach when I'm thinking of information systems, and not just data, that I always think around technology and people and process. Given that you probably has the strongest technical background of all of our panelists, what excites you in the data world from a technological perspective? So what are the technologies that you have seen, that you've been exposed to, that you maybe keep an eye on for your own organization into the future, that you would like to share with us very briefly?
Thanks, Martin, for the question. In fact, the technology around data is quite in an interesting phase, I would say. Things are moving quite quickly, but haven't reached full maturity. So it's a very interesting space to be playing at the moment, because you get to actually contribute and shape how technology is going to look in a few years from now. From where we come from a space where, if I have to call it, entry cost into playing with data was quite high, because you needed to have a full team of tech people that you needed to hire and keep in a company to maintain things like servers, databases, a lot of compute resources. Now with the cloud, things have moved so quickly that the entry cost has been lowered significantly. Anybody, wherever you are, if you have internet connectivity, I guess everybody on the call, if you can join this call, you probably have a good internet connection. You can actually get into using all this tech available online on the cloud. So you have you have main players. If I have to name a couple, AWS, Google, Microsoft, IBM, they do provide quite a full stack of data, product, and services that anybody can just quickly jump in and start putting things together. And that goes from ingesting your data. So like if you have multiple sources, could be data that you produce in your own company, or it could be data that you acquired from other places. So multiple sources of data you can have. It's now easy to ingest using some connectors that are available on the cloud. You have a few of them, I can just mention some, like Fivetran or all other. You have open sources as well. You have the ones that you have paid in premium. They help you ingest your data and centralize all your information in some place that's usually now these days called data lakes. We have different variations of these data lakes, and from there you can apply different processing or transformations to your data, so that you can integrate all these sources into one single integrated place. Most of the time, for industry, they're called data warehouses. And then from there, once you have that in the data warehouse, you can do many other things. Very interesting application.
I'd like to circle back from the process perspective in a short while, and maybe understand the concept of a lake better. But I think extremely important is the entrance hurdle went from vast capital expenditure into operational expenditure, and I think it's a really important learning. But Maritza, dealing with data and gaining value from data, Yolanda, apologies, I just saw your hand too late there. I'm going to circle next to you from a process. Allow me to complete the question to Maritza quickly. We kicked off with a technical perspective, and I think Emmanuel shared with us what has transpired from a technological perspective to lower the entrance hurdle, and also probably to be more integrated with all the APIs and the things. But it's not just a technical game. There are human beings involved in there as well. What's your perspective on the role of decision makers, humans within data and gaining value from data?
I'm so glad you asked me this question. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about. I am going to add on to what Emmanuel said, though, because I think it leads into the value question. And Emmanuel is quite right. You know, our data analytics industry, from a technology point of view, is developing so quickly. It's hard to keep up with all of the new architecture approaches, all the new technologies. I do data analytics for a living, and I struggle to keep up. So, you know, I have a question around, okay, so with all of this new technology and new approaches, how do we actually understand what's going to enable our data strategies? And that's where the value comes in for me, because technology really is the enabler, isn't it? It is not the silver bullet. It's not the start. The start, if you really want to get value from your data and analytics and from your data strategy, the start is always people. Because real value you get when your data strategy is aligned to your business strategy, when you are answering real business questions, when you are solving real business problems, and when you are unlocking real business opportunities. Now, as data professionals and the data office, that's not something that we can decide on our own. So it starts with conversations with the business. So the days when we formulated our data strategies around technology, long gone, long gone. We have to formulate our strategies around people. So what are the skills we need so that we can realize all of these data goals? What are the education we have to think about? Not only data literacy, but also business literacy, if we want to get real value from our data.
Absolutely.
So it's a multidimensional approach, really. You can't just look at technology, you can't just look at people, you can't just look at a process. You have to look at it holistically if you're really going to get value. But just to end off, real value starts with people, starts with a conversation, and with business alignment.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yolanda, apologies. You indicated actually wanted to latch on something that Emmanuel has said. Please do, and continue with Maritza's contribution as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that Emmanuel pinged with me was on the compute technologies, and that barrier of entry that has been removed, and tying that into the people. I mean, if we think about the terminology of data science, it's a new label. Anyone in stats wants to be a data scientist, but if there's any actuaries in this forum, probably for the last 80 years, actuaries were data scientists. They just never had the turbo engine to run with. And that's what technology has given. But as Maritza has highlighted, having a turbo engine does not change the world if you don't have the people that knows how to drive it and how to leverage it. And also if you don't have the processes to maintain that turbo engine or upgrade it or extend it. And that's the holistic ecosystem, the people, process, and technologies.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So Stuart, when we think about data and we hear that the actuaries have been data scientists, which didn't call them data scientists, we sometimes fall in a trap of thinking of data as being highly structured or sitting in Excel spreadsheets or being quantitative of nature. So we're thinking of these, what did Yolanda call them, these turbo tools to crunch the numbers quicker and faster and all the interesting things. But that's not the only kinds of data that we have. And in your organization and what you're doing, you're looking at other kinds of data and data in the open domain and qualitative data. Would you mind just sharing with the audience very briefly what you do and your view on data and more towards the qualitative side of things?
Sure. I mean, I work in two areas. The one is market research, where a lot of the work is qualitative. And the other is where it intersects with data and analytics at the Center for Analytics and Behavioral Change. And there we use social media, corporate social media tools to analyze big data and then try and make it small. And so, I mean, social media is a fascinating space because while it used to be quite a good data set, if you like, it was actually a relatively good reflection of how people felt maybe 5-6 years ago, which is when I really started working in the space. You could actually really get an understanding of how people felt in particular countries about particular things by looking at the data. It's since then become incredibly manipulated. And so it's not, if you like, a clean data set anymore. And so what we're doing is we're looking for the mis and disinformation inside of that social media. So we start with really big data sets where we're looking at millions and millions, if not tens of millions of tweets, of data points and so on. And we then need to break those down. And we kind of structure that in a funnel where we start with the big data and the big data tools, and we use that to sort of separate the data out. And then at some point, human people interaction has to come into it, to Maritza's point. So we have a next level where we have a crowd that we work with of several thousand who help us analyze those tweets. They get drawn down randomly out of the big data set. They're statistically representative, and then they get analyzed down. And then we work with those, and we work in dialogue inside of social media to understand that even better. And sometimes the most insightful stuff comes from that dialogue, reporting on the feeling about what people are saying, the kind of mood and the shifts that we're seeing. So we're sort of attacking it from a whole bunch of different levels, from the macro big data level all the way down to the micro conversational level. And for me, whenever I start looking at big data sets in either of my roles, either for a client in market research or in the CABC, where we're looking more at social stuff. So we're looking at xenophobia, we're looking at various prejudices, we're looking at state capture, organized networks that are manipulating conversations. I'm always interested in the insight behind it. It's the okay, here's the data. My question is why are things happening in a particular way? That's critical to understand, however one gets to that. And then the so what that kind of comes out of that. What do you do with that information? And that kind of always preoccupies me, that back end, the why and the so what is my preoccupation.
The real vexing questions that takes that requires complex answers. Maritza, you'd like to add?
I actually have a question for the other
Maritza,
conversationalists.
I apologize. If you're a panelist, you're not allowed to ask questions. The questions come from the audience. That you're only here today to give answers. But Yolanda disagrees. She shook her head. So kindly go ahead with your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Yolanda. So just based on this last conversation. So again, like I said, Emmanuel, talked about how quickly technology is evolving in our industry. Yolanda mentioned that, hey, we've had data science with us for a very long time. It's not really new. And Stuart was talking about big data. In fact, big data isn't new either, because that's why we built data warehouses 30, 40 years ago, because big data problem. So my question is, how do we look beyond the hype? So how do we understand, if we look at the trends in the industry, what is applicable to my organization? What should I be looking at? Because honestly, every year at the beginning of the year, I look at the new trends in the industry for that year. And my heart almost seizes, because I've just about, had to sell a kidney to fund my enterprise data lake that I've just started building. And now the hype is, oh, enterprise data lake is dead. So you've got to build something else, a data fabric or whatever. So how do we kind of stick to our true north and get an understanding of what technology is going to enable our data strategies, rather than just jumping on every single trend and new thing out there? It's difficult.
I think it's a really important question. Emmanuel, I think I'm going to circle back to you, given that Maritza only has one kidney left. And you made a compelling argument initially of how the entrance cost for technology is being reduced. But I think what Maritza argues extremely well is, although the entrance cost for using particular sets of technologies may have been reduced, there are so many of them around, and the technology is moving so quickly that we are prone to invest on an ongoing basis. Although we may be paying less per unit of processing power, there's so much more tools that we can do. How does your organization deal with that? How do you keep an eye on these new technologies, and when do you invest? And I'd like to move towards the business case of how do we actually get value from that? Yolanda, while Emmanuel is asking, Mark posed a really interesting question around the hiring of data scientists and the people. So we've seen the centricity of the humans, but I'd like to move from Emmanuel to you next around that question of how do we attract and retain the talent to work in this particular space. Emmanuel?
Yeah, that is actually a very important question. I've lived it. I've suffered from that, these changing directions. And how do you stay faithful to your real initial North Star? The first thing is to have one to start with. You need to have one very clear North Star, because that at times is also missing. People don't know exactly what they want to do with data.
Could you explain that in slightly less technical terms for the audience? What do you mean by that?
What I mean is, if you want to embrace data in your organization, have an idea of what you want to do with it. Have an idea of what you want to achieve with your data. If you don't have that clearly defined, then you start going in all possible directions. So if you have a clear understanding of where you want to go, then you put down a certain strategy. By strategy, you just mean, what do you say yes to and what do you say no to? Perfect. How do you think you're going to run in this space? I think that is the very first thing you start with. Because just to add on the actual problem is, you do have, as I said, so many products out there. You do have so many. The hype is quite existent, especially in the things like, for instance, the things that Stuart just talked about. The possibility to be able to analyze social media data. I mean, that is fantastic. And you do have a lot of things, a lot of articles being published around either machine learning or data science, and everybody wants that hype. And at times, even people in the data space use that hype, because if you want to get the budget, you need to impress somebody. And people get impressed by these things, even if they don't necessarily give them the real value. So make sure the value you want to get, define the road to that, and stick to that. Pick one tool, drop the other, as long as you're working toward your objectives.
Manuel, just checking, you still have both kidneys?
Yeah, I kept mine.
Okay.
Both of them.
Yolanda, attracting people in a highly competitive industry, and I think one of the biggest challenges that we are seeing today, having spoken to people recently, is people that are still based in the beautiful Cape Town with the quality of living, but working for international firms and no longer being available for employment locally. How do we attract talent?
That's a very difficult question, especially in our industry, in our country, because you named it, Mark. You named Google. The Googles, the AWSs is in our market, and they're offering the people with the right skills the US money or the European money, and that is what we compete with. I think I think the answer lies in that combination of value and technology. We must remember people that aspires to be data scientists. Yes, some of them are boys with toys and they like the new technologies and they want to have that exposure. But in most cases, your data value proposition and your employee value proposition comes together. If the why, if the problem you want to solve with the data is aspirational, is something that touches their heart and their why, you will attract the right people. So if your strategy, if your value that you are pursuing, your true north, is truly engaging, people will come with the right skills. Now, I'm going to double barrel that answer though, because we have to invest. In South Africa, we don't have the skills to attract even. The handful we have in the market are chowed up by the big guys. So we have to take hands and build skills. Invest in your graduate programs. Open up the graduate programs from just accounting and HR internships to true data internships. Invest in the people and grow them.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you, Yolanda. It certainly ties in with the research that we're seeing in the business school community as well. Is that one of our competitive advantages that we have as organizations today is if the values of the organization and the true north and what we intend to do. I'm thinking of the amazing work that you're doing around disinformation, Stuart. If that aligns with the personal aspirations of the individuals, and that's sustainable. Whereas if you offer more money, you only have 2 kidneys, and then that's no longer an option. So thank you for a fantastic answer, but also thank you for the little bit of clarity around we have to invest in our own skills development as well. That is required, because that retains people as well. Stuart, I'd like. Yeah, sorry, there was.
Can I just add one small thing to what Yolanda just said? I think that's what you just said has helped me, and definitely one thing we all need to do is to invest in what we call juniors. You know, the ones that are coming fresh from varsity. And the other thing is you can attract people, but you need to maintain them. You need to keep them. All right, you can't keep them forever, but you want to make sure you keep them for a certain amount of time. And what I've learned in this trying to keep people is you need to maintain a moving flow. So you need to allow people to come in, grow, and leave. So if you keep people in, nobody will be happy. Allow them to grow and leave, and keep that flow going. Get new ones in, let them grow, let them leave. As long as you have that flow running, you'll probably be happy.
Perfect. Thank you so much. A reality on more modern practice of employment practices. Stuart, you made a comment in your previous answer to say we need to make the big data small, and that resonated with me. What do you mean by we need to make the big data small? And I'd like to steer the conversation in terms of where do we get value from these vast sets of data? Obviously, there's some very interesting nuances in all the textual data that you're analyzing, but what is the value? What is the ultimate goal? We've now heard from more than one panelist the importance of aligning the data strategy with the business strategy, and that the data strategy is no longer around technology, it's the humans. But what do we aim for? What is the value proposition that sits embedded within the data? And why does big data need to become small for us to be able to be valuable?
Yeah, thanks. And I actually also want to just respond to what Emmanuel and Yolanda were talking about as well after this. But it's obviously contextual. Everything is contextual. So in what context are you working? What kind of data are you working with? What are you intending to do with it? I think, as Emmanuel said, is all critical. But no matter what the context of your business, you're working in a broader context, which is both political and economic, these days increasingly so. And so understanding the world around you and how your business fits into that world is critical on one level. And that's a little bit meta. That's not so much just understanding the people that your business works with. So if we look at this just from a business perspective, I think there are a few really important things. The first we've alluded to here. If you want to attract good talent, you need to have values beyond profit. I think the days of business only existing for profit are gone, and they should be. I don't think it's ever been a sustainable model. And so start to look for the things that you genuinely value as a business leader or a business owner, and start to embed those into your business and into your business practices, and then start to attract people to you based on that. A company like Yellowwoods in South Africa does that extraordinarily well. They have a social justice mission behind what they do, and they attract talent on that basis. Of course, we're a special case at the CABC. We're by definition attracting people that are values-based, but we also have the approach that Emmanuel has, as I do in other businesses I've run, which is that you're always going to be a stopping point in we don't work in a place for life anymore. We're a stopping point for people, and how much value can we get out of people? How much value can we get out of them as we, go through that transaction? So understanding context is critical. Understanding political and social context is critical. And then inside your business, deep down in that data, are individual people doing individual things. They're going to a shop and they're buying something. Maybe that's the kind of data set you're looking at. They're expressing an opinion on social media. That's the kind of data set we look at. But talking to them, understanding them, there's still no better way of knowing your customer than actually genuinely knowing your customer, and talking to them and engaging in qualitative research, being in a conversation with them as much as you can. And the technologies we have now to do that are manifold. We can do that on social media platforms. We can do that on the phone. We can do that by email. We can do it by surveys. We can do it in focus groups. There are all these ways in which one can do that. But constantly updating your understanding of what's going on inside the data, I think is critical. And that's what I mean by small data, is that one insight is sometimes far more valuable than a whole bunch of data sets. So what is that? To preoccupy yourself with that without crippling your business, because that's all you end up doing, but trying to really get to that understanding. And that's competitive leverage as well. It's like knowing your customer that well, or knowing the people in your business that well, or in your sector that well. It provides that competitive leverage, because that's a very hard thing to find these days.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stuart. Maritza, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, so I want to add on to the conversation around value and talent retention, and what Stuart just said around context, because context is something that we often don't get right in data and analytics, specifically in analytics. And one of the skills that we are not teaching, or that we are not developing in our organizations, is information design or storytelling. So one of the ways, part of your value proposition, as Yolanda put it, for your analysts, is they have to feel like they are adding value to your organization. And so one way in how they can do that, because we do find in the industry that data scientists and analysts are very good at pulling a story out of the data. They're not very good at telling that story to a business audience, and really making that connection between the context that Stuart was talking about, which is your business and how your business fits into the competitive environment and into the world, and really bringing those insights to the fore, so that there's a so what? So what do we do with this? What is the recommendation? So that's one of the skills that we're actually not developing it. It's not part of the curricula of many of the education institutions, post-grad courses in analytics. Definitely don't see it. And we don't do it as part of our talent development in our organizations, but it's such an important thing. If you are going to get value out of your data, you've got to be able to tell the stories, and we're just not doing it.
Fantastic. As an educator on the school, I think we take note, Kerry. We take note in terms of the deficiencies in our own worlds. Stuart, you'd like to add something to Maritza's storyline?
Yeah, I was just thinking about context. We're starting to work now in the climate change context.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about earlier about what they used to call black swan events. I don't know if they still do. You know,
They
like
do.
COVID was a black swan event.
Yeah.
But in climate change, these black swan events, which are basically impossible events, are happening all the time. So, you know, a 10-year flood is now happening every 2 years, or a 100-year event is happening every 10 years. And that's happening everywhere in our world. Our world is chaotic, and it's deeply interconnected and really contextual. I was thinking of like people that trade in wheat futures, and they're sort of going along going, you know, we've got these models, we've got this data, and wheat's going to do this. And then suddenly Russia invades Ukraine, and suddenly all of their models are blown up. COVID did the same thing to a whole bunch of modeling that you might do around your business, from the really simple stuff to like, how much are we likely to actually pull in revenue next year, to the far more complicated stuff that some businesses engage in. And trying to, we were looking at future foresight earlier on. It's really, really difficult, but the more we understand context, the more likely we are to be able to predict those events, and to keep our ears to the ground and really have as deep an understanding of the way we fit into the world as possible.
Perfect. Thank you, Stuart. Yolanda, you had an interesting take on data as an asset. You said something that resonated well with me, that if we think about data, it's very different from our traditional mindset of thinking of the assets that we have within our organizations. Would you mind sharing that with the audience?
And it's only interesting to you, Martin, because of the wine farm behind you. I have an analogy that I've built out, because if you look at industry white papers and stories, etc., all of the technical jargon is so complex that, as we talked about the skills development, talked about how do we embrace this thing that we don't necessarily understand, it's difficult to get it from kind of the industry paperwork. So if we start thinking about product data not as an intangible asset, but as a product, then everything around how do you manage data, how do you think about the value of data, etc., starts to become clear. So I take the analogy of wine manufacturing. There's a whole manufacturing value chain. From the grape farms, when I was in my MBA, we had winemakers, and they go out every season and they taste the grapes. They're part of that manufacturing value chain. There's wine farms that farm the grapes. Those grapes have value as they are. Grapes get sold as a product, and grapes get consumed as a product. So on an operational level in your organization, one data point, as Stuart said, that small data, that one insight has value. But you can take that one insight and you can enhance it. You can add value to it. You can mash it up with other grapes. You can blend it, and now you press. And you don't get wine yet, you get juice. And juice has value for people. But then you take that juice and you go through the winemaking process, you ferment it, it goes into casks. Depending on how long it stands, maybe more value gets added as bulk history data has huge value in showing us trends over long term, etc. Talking about Stuart's patterns over seasonality and history, etc. And so every step in the manufacturing process changes and increases the value of your data. And as we think about how do we do this in our organization, if you use that story and you think about, okay, but in this manufacturing value chain, there's people involved in different points. There's control points involved in different points. One of the wine farms that might just be pressing and making the wine have a contract with the other farm that farms the grapes, and they agree quality of the product that gets provided as raw material input to the winemaking process. Think around that thing pragmatically as you plan your data strategy, and go and look at, listen, I don't necessarily only need the most high quality, $1,000 wine bottle when I want value out of my data. I can actually extract value out of my data everywhere in this value chain. And this brings it to the point of, how do I scale? If we keep on talking around in the industry about getting value out of data through one machine learning model, that's not enterprise scale value. That's not getting the most out of your data. It's only getting one instance, one grape, or one glass of wine. You want to set up your data so that you can continuously get value out for your organization, and that you can ultimately use the data to enable your organization to win in their strategy, to Maritza's point of tying business strategy and data strategy together.
Perfect, Yolanda, that's lovely. My colleague Justin Slier is also on the call, and he lectures, he does the lecture around data for our MBA students. Justin, I think we should take that 5-minute recording and make it part of the pre-reading or the pre-watching for the students, because it's such a lovely analogy to understand how different people are involved throughout the process and adding data as we go along. Maritza?
Absolutely love the analogy. Absolutely love it. It just makes it so clear. So Yolanda, when you and I write our data and analytics book, we'll put that in. Okay. Bestseller for sure. So
on the cover page.
Yeah.
I hope Emmanuel and Stuart and Martin at least get a mention on the back page.
We'll mention you, definitely. But the one thing that Yolanda said that this analogy really highlights for me, and it's so important, is the fact that there are different people involved in this value chain. And it comes back to value and context, because what I'm getting from what Yolanda is saying is that, you know, a data team is not successful on its own. You need a whole community for data and analytics to be successful in your organization. And that community involves everyone. It involves the data office, it involves IT, it involves the business, HR,
absolutely,
learning and development, everyone. And I think this is one of the most important skills that a data leader today absolutely have to have. And that is the ability to build communities, not only in your own organization, but also within your organization's network. Because if data is really going to be an asset, if data is really going to be something that people use in the right way and responsibly, then you have to get them excited about data. You've got to show them that value. And it's back to what Yolanda said. It's, you know, about speaking to the hearts and the minds and the hands. So for me, building communities, if you cannot do that in your organization, if you cannot establish a positive data culture, it doesn't matter that you have beautiful data, it's great quality.
Absolutely true.
You're not going to get value. Absolutely
true, Maritza. And I see that as I do consulting work with organizations as well. You can see where that culture is being embedded within the organization, because you don't have to force it down people's throats. They actually come and ask for it because they know the grapes is somewhere and they know that there's something that they can infer from the data. And it's such a mind shift in organizations where that maturity has grown to value what we have there. Melissa has asked a really interesting question in terms of how do SMEs start? We sometimes forget, we think about large organizations and large investments. And I'm going to throw that open to the panel. But before I do that, Emmanuel, I want to circle back to you. Maritza made a very interesting point for me in terms of we're good at extracting the story from the data, but we're not good at telling the story. And it really resonates with me because she's spot on. It's not a skill that we teach at the business school. We don't do it in our degree programs, and I don't think we do it in our executive education programs. And I think it's something we need to do too. But you did an interesting transition from an academic career, or at least studying for a long time and doing your PhD and studying in France and studying on cutting edge scientific methods. And then you transitioned into industry. What is your take in terms of where are the gaps in the formal education system that you maybe personally experienced transitioning into industry? and that you may be observing in your hires, the people that you hire today, and that you wish that they had certain skills or that we imparted that as part of our learning processes?
Yeah. So when Maritza was talking about it, I thought it felt almost as if she was talking about me, because that is an actual problem that everybody who has my kind of background, except you do have a few genius in the midst, but most of us will struggle with that. You're good at taking things, value out of data, but how do we present that so that it makes sense to the audience? That is something we were never trained to do. And I remember my first days working as a data scientist, I'll come up with something that I find very interesting. You get some metrics that you understand, very statistical metrics that you understand, and they just make so much sense to you, and they excite you. You think they're going to excite everybody else. And then you get like some sort of cold shower when you tell these numbers to people and nobody reacts. You're like, what did I do wrong? I thought it was exciting. And I learned it the hard way. A couple of cold showers like that, I was like, all right, definitely my numbers and stats are not impressing anybody. I need to move on. And then you have to start interacting. I learned it by interacting a little bit more with the business, getting more involved in their conversations, the kind of things they will talk about, what was of interest to them. And it's only when you start sharing interest with everybody else in the audience, all the business stakeholders, that you learn to speak their language, and you start translating your stat into something that makes sense for them and actually makes sense for the business. Because at the end of the day, business want to create some value, and you want to speak to them in terms of these values. What I've done here, what value is it adding to what we're doing, not just mere numbers. So we probably don't get it from varsity because, or all trainings, because we're not trained to work for specific businesses. We're not trained to necessarily add value to a certain business. We were trained to put all these technical tools together and get something out of it. But then how do you apply this to contribute to certain value? That's the gap. How do we sort it? I think I don't have an answer, but from my experience, it's to bring different stakeholders together. The more you put people together, the more they tend to learn the language of the other, and they communicate better.
I think Yolanda posted earlier that it's a team sport, and I think that is a team from multiple individuals, not just technical people.
Absolutely. I mean, sorry, Martin, from my experience being in the data consulting side of the coin, very often clients come to us and say, okay, so I'm in the insurance industry. What value is there in my data? And I refuse to answer them, because as Maritza said, it's all about the business value. You are the business. You have the problem statements. You bring the problem statements, and we'll help you to find the answers in your data. But you have to take ownership of it. As long as it is this us and them, kind of the data people against the business people, and the data people have to prove to business that there's value in the data, the culture is conflicting, and you're not going to get that value out.
Chapter 7 in Curry and Smith's upcoming book, that business people versus the data people. You'll have to wait, unfortunately. All people on this call today get a 10% discount on the book. Sorry, Maritza. Yolanda. We're looking forward to reading that chapter. Melissa asked an interesting question, especially in the SME sector. We forgot sometimes that not everybody is working in large corporates that may have made these investments. And Stuart, I'm going to start with you, but anybody is very welcome to chip in, because you have some experience in setting up new businesses over a period of time, and interesting new businesses that are looking at problems that were not there 5 and 10 years ago in disinformation and misinformation. Where do SMEs start? How do they start this journey? And maybe tell us how you started your journey, and what is the commonality that we can all learn from that?
my journey's been quite hard actually in this space. And it was something I wanted to mention earlier on, is this kind of sense that technology is opportunity and threat simultaneously. And in the SME sector, you're looking for innovation, and you're looking to provide value to whomever's consuming your services. And what I found, particularly in the market research industry, was that we were being innovative. We were coming up with really cool things, you know. I mean, way back when we were doing like eye tracking on websites, and we were playing around with this cool software that was quite nascent. We were developing our own things. We were using like headsets and putting brain Watsits on people's heads and monitoring all sorts of things.
Way before Elon Musk's Neuralink.
Yeah, before Neuralink, yeah. And working with the brain doctors, can't remember what they're called. You know, so we were doing a lot of really innovative stuff. And then suddenly along would come an innovation, an app. Some American company would have been doing this work, specializing in it, and suddenly came out with something. And suddenly it was global. And suddenly everyone was using that. And you're like, oh, okay, we were just busy developing that, and then it's gone, you know? So I kind of learned from that. I think that SMEs, as they develop, need to have a really good sense of what they're doing and be focused on it. But there's also just this randomness to how the world unfolds that's quite challenging. As you develop into spaces that use technologies, that use data more, it only really, I mean, that only really becomes possible at a point at which that SME has grown to a relatively substantial business. And so, you know, it's when you're dealing with or trying to deal with data as a smaller SME, you're probably going to focus more on qualitative data than you are on gathering big data, and you're going to work with the kind of commonly available tools rather than the specialized stuff. And you're going to build a small team, and it's going to build over time. And then the other side of where we worked was actually funding based. So we needed to convince people preemptively that what we wanted to do was of value before we'd even done that. And that was like, how do we tackle mis and disinformation? Here are the tools we need, and they're very expensive in order to even begin to take a look at that. And so that was a process of knocking on a whole lot of doors, being really clear about what we wanted to do, as clear as we could be as we were stepping into something that we didn't really know, and then raise funding for that. And that's the other way to go into that kind of space. And I had a final thought around just on what you were talking about earlier on, was the sense of disparity between data scientists and other parts of a business. Obviously, the smaller the business is, the more embedded the data scientists are in the rest of the business, kind of by definition. And I think that should be taken out into big corporations as well, because I think that two things that I've learned, and I think are probably pretty obvious, but they're worth saying, is that firstly, universities are set up wrong, right? We have all these different units all working separately to each other. I mean, that's how, when universities were set up in the 1700s or whenever it was, they were like, okay, well, we'll put those people over there, the humanities go over there, the people working out how to put the leeches onto people in the medicine department, they're going over there. And everyone went and did their own thing and specialized separately. And what we know now, and there's some fascinating work being done at MIT and various other places in the States, is that innovation comes from the merging of disciplines at an interface in which you're tackling a common problem. And that's the opportunity that you get inside of a business with a set of data scientists and really cool data with the rest of the business. You bring the humanities into the data. You bring all these various skill sets in the business, the business skill sets together, and you get them in a room. And that's the starting point. Here's the stuff. Let's workshop this. What do you find of interest in this? You know, more and more, we're busy working, as I said earlier, with climate change now, and we're working in a space that we don't quite understand, but we're working with people that understand it really well. And we're able now to take our data, enrich it as much as we can qualitatively, and then take it to them. And they're able to go, this is interesting. That's interesting. Let's follow up on that. Let's go down that rabbit hole. So that's, yeah. But from an SME perspective, it is challenging, of course. And I guess you do what you can, and you don't try and be too overambitious, I would think. Hold on to the cash as best you can.
Yeah, Stuart, I think you made an interesting point, and I'm spot on in terms of the way that we've structured universities. I'm not here to punt Stellenbosch, but I do think the one thing that has given me some comfort over the last couple of years, we now have a data sciences center And it's the first time in the history of Stellenbosch University, and it's really, you don't have a lot of that globally, that doesn't belong to a faculty. So previously, if you set up a center always sits in the faculty, but the data science center does not sit in a faculty because it doesn't make any sense. So they work with the mathematics guys in terms of the algorithm. They work with social sciences guys in terms of telling the story. We work with the business school in terms of building the business case. We work with the engineering guys in terms of doing the technology. So it's a center. It's not easy because, as you rightly pointed out, for 300 years, centers belong to faculties. And now you have the center that doesn't belong to a faculty. But I can see the value that's emerging. And there's also value emerging from the friction, because now for the first time, you have engineers in the business schools arguing about something that's worth arguing about, but previously it was only within one of these domains. So we didn't have these arguments. So I think it makes a huge amount of sense. Emmanuel, I'd like to keep on Melissa's question. And now that we know that the data lake is filled with pinotage, thanks to Yolanda, I will never think about the data lake again the same. You actually started, the answer to your first question was around the evolution in technology. And how certain kinds of technology and maybe APIs and interoperability, is there a little bit of a light in the tunnel? I very much relate to what Stuart has said. It's tough. It's not easy for an SME, and as he said, it's been hard. Do you think from a technological perspective that there are some things that is making it slightly easier for SMEs specifically to start to play in this space?
Yeah, there are. Yeah, I agree. First of all, it could be at times very challenging for SMEs to kind of embrace to fully embrace the data due to, of course, budget limitations. But there are a lot of technologies out there that are quite cheap, and I think any SME could always try a couple of them. Like as I was saying earlier, in terms of compute, the compute isn't that expensive as we might think, especially if you keep it nicely in control. I mean, one risk I must say straight away is if you do not have proper control when using these cloud resources, it can easily get out of control. And you can find yourself paying millions of US dollars just because you let something run for too long. So as long as you keep them in control, you can actually get away with very small cost, compute cost, and achieve a lot. In terms of software, you do have a lot of open source these days. Most of the companies like I use a lot of Databricks. Databricks give a platform for any profile within data. So for data analysts, data engineers, data scientists, everybody can work within Databricks. And it comes at a cost, but most of the software that makes up Databricks is open source. So technically, if you don't want to go for Databricks paid version, you can still use most of the features as open source. Now, the only thing you need to be aware of is somebody needs to maintain these open source. If you deploy them for yourself on a little computer that you can afford, or a certain server that is on the cloud that you can afford, somebody will need to maintain this. So while you want to pay that subscription fee, you need to have somebody who can do the work of maintaining that. So but for an SME, it's a very viable way of doing things. You go for open source, keep in mind that at some point you need to scale. Make sure that if you carry on with open source, you have a proper way of scaling by probably growing the teams that maintain this open source, or in the long term, after you have proved that you have created a lot of value out of this open source, maybe you have more budget. Maybe then you change your strategy around technology and start buying. So there's always this idea of buying versus getting open source. So it doesn't have to be something set in stone. You start with what you can afford, and as you grow, you can reconsider and change from one to the other.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maritza.
So I want to add on to this and also argue that this challenge is not just with SMEs. We have a budget and funding challenge in corporates as well, or established organizations. It's one of the first lessons I learned in my data analytics careers. You're not going to get all the funding that you were hoping you were going to get, because commercial goals will always trump your data strategy. And if we're really honest and you look at what it costs to implement a data strategy properly, it's almost inhibitive. So we have to find ways to use our existing technologies in different ways. And we have to find ways to use our new technologies and new capabilities in old ways. So what I mean by that is that you don't have to go and buy brand new technology for a specific purpose. So for example, part of our data strategy is to democratize data, which means that people need easy access to data. So we wanted a DNA portal, a next generation DNA portal, but it's expensive. So we kind of looked around in our IT landscape and we found technology that we already own that we can use to build that DNA portal. Okay, problem solved. You already have the skill, by the way, as well. Using new skills for old purposes. So AI is, or most of IT security tools have AI embedded in it now, but not every company has deep pockets to pay for those kind of tools. So if you already have an AI capability, you already have a machine learning engineer or machine learning engineers in your team, why not apply that to data governance and data management? You know, why go out and buy a 5 million Rand metadata management tool if you can actually build something that's fit for purpose for you?
Sits in your tech stack already.
Yes. So, you know, just rethink how you want to implement. And I think that goes for corporates as well as for SMEs.
I think, Maritza, there is a tendency sometimes for businesses to listen to vendors, and it's sometimes easier to go and sit in a boardroom and listen to a flashy presentation from a vendor that promises something new than to actually go back to what we already have and really sweat our assets and really use the tools and technologies that we have. And maybe within our tool set is that one thing that Stuart has said, that subtle nuance, that small little insight. I don't need new investments in there. Melissa, I think it's a complex answer. I hope you got some pointers from our panelists. But clearly it's a complex answer, and you'll have to wait for chapter number 2, which is funding your data science initiatives, and then chapter number 11 is data science for SMEs. So I'm really looking forward to the book, and I want some royalties as well.
I'm loving this, Maritza. He's writing a book for us.
I know, it's amazing. I didn't have a framework at all, and here it is.
Yolanda, I'm going to circle. We're starting to close our conversation, and I wouldn't mind continue for an hour or two. It's been fascinating for me, but I want to start with you with the most complex of questions, and luckily we have alluded to this already through the conversation. But it's the value conversation. How do we think about value? I think it's been made very clear that it's context specific. But if you now need to approach people within organizations, be it to sell consulting services, be it to do new implementations, how do we think about the value that can be added with data in organizations? You know, if I want to invest in a new factory, I understand that it's going to give me production processes. If I want to invest in a new website, I understand it's going to give me potentially new customers or customer insights. So we have a very tangible mindset around a return on investment. How do we think about the value that can be unlocked by investments in, be it the technology, be it the process, be it the people side?
That's a very good question. And it brings the circle back to the start of the conversation and talking about the business strategy. The key question is, what is the business strategy and what value do you want to get out? Now, the levers in a business strategy for value is revenue uplift, efficiencies, increased productivities or cost containment, and risk management. Those are the key things, and it's as simple as that. So the question goes to business to say, your data has insights in it. What insights do you need to help you be insight-led in deciding how you're going to uplift your revenue, or how you're going to cut your costs, or how you're going to contain your risk? Those are the insights required that gives you the business problem statements that the data team then wants to delve into the data and answer. So if you have that, if you spend that time to think about, okay, what questions do I need to answer so that I can uplift my revenue, cut my costs, and contain my risk, then you have your business case for data.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Stuart, would you like to add to that?
I find that structure so interesting, that containing risks, basically maximizing profits while sort of maintaining a view of the landscape. The last thing I wanted to say actually was to go back to what Emmanuel was talking about, was the cost of these various tools. We've established you need to be very clear about what you want to do with it. You want to embed it inside of the business. You want to make sure that everyone is benefiting from it. I mean, why do this if other people don't benefit from it? I don't understand that with businesses. I once got approached by a business, very, very big one, that had a store loyalty card that they'd been collecting data for, I won't mention names, for the last 20 years. They had this massive treasure trove of data. And they said, and I was like, surely the reason that you do this is to gather and use this data. You mean you haven't been using? No, we don't know what to do with it. Can you tell us? And I was like, no, just to Yolanda's point. It's like, no, I can't tell you. I think you should tell yourself somewhere along the line. But if you, the way that the world is structured now is that things are intensely competitive, and they're competitive at particular price points. And so to Emmanuel's point, you will find something at the price point that you can afford in an SME context to add some value to your business. Start small and build it up from there, and build it with a view to trying to understand what you're doing as well as possible.
Perfect, thank you. Maritza, your view on how to approach the powers that be. As you've rightly pointed out, there's not unlimited funding. How do we make our business case for investments in data? Help Melissa. Melissa may be in an SME, but what is it that she needs to sell when she goes to those that hold the purse strings?
So I fully agree with Yolanda around, those specific areas that you can target and you can quantify them. There's nothing that I've run into in my career that cannot be measured. And this is something that's often put forward, almost as an excuse. We can't really measure the value of data analytics because it's intangible. So better decision making is intangible. Well, there's an underlying problem, a real problem linked to why you cannot make better decisions. That's the thing that you want to identify and that you want to quantify. So the one thing that I would add to what Yolanda said is you also need some people KPIs on your data scorecard, which is chapter 20 in our book. So, you have to have things like maybe a data literacy index or a data analytics skills index. And again, it comes back to understanding what is your true north. What are the things that you're trying to do? Those are the things that you have to measure, but identify the problems and the opportunities up front, quantify them, put it in your business case, and take it to the exec and the investment committee. That is the only way you are going to get investment for your data strategy. There's no other way. And again, I want to say, nothing is unmeasurable. You just have to understand the problem or the opportunity. Then you can quantify it and measure it. And sorry, Emmanuel, one last thing, because this is a hard lesson. This is a hard lesson I learned and I want to share it.
Which chapter?
Oh, this is still part of measuring the value. The scorecard is chapter 20. The data office cannot be responsible on our own for measuring or proving the value of data and analytics. There's some ownership that sits in the business, and Yolanda actually did talk about it. The business is responsible for prioritizing data initiatives. So the business is responsible for identifying and defining the KPIs that's linked to that initiative, not the data office. So make sure that if you're a data leader, make sure that you understand what are those KPIs, whether it's commercial uplift or whatever, and the business needs to define it. not you, the business. It's a partnership.
Otherwise, you get Stuart's example. We're sitting with 20 years of customer data on a loyalty system, and
exactly,
and no business exec has ever taken ownership of crunching it and actually extracting the value from what could be a fantastic set of data.
Exactly, and
Emmanuel?
it's the same. It's the same exec that's going to say, "Why did we invest so much in data and analytics? We're not getting any value out of it."
Oh, you work in industry, Maritza.
I do.
Emmanuel?
Yes, it's actually a very interesting point, how you measure the value of analytics. I'm asking this question because I don't have an answer to it. Maybe there are many who don't have that answer. For me, it's easy to measure things like, all right, we're going to automate a process. Before, it would take 10 people that have this much, this was a salary of per month to do this work. Now we don't need 10 people anymore. We just need a little script that will run, job done. You have saved the cost. Easy. Now, how do you measure the value that analytics has brought on decision making? If you don't just measure some proxies, like, okay, now people consult our BI tool a bit more often than they used to, but how do you measure the exact value? Because you have so many moving pieces. Because first of all, people grow in maturity, so they'll probably with time make better decisions. People move around. You get new people who are probably better skilled than the previous ones. So there's so many moving pieces that how do you attribute a certain improvement in decision making to analytics?
Gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time. We are not done yet. We have 13 minutes remaining for any questions. We are that part of the proceedings where you're more than welcome to raise your hand in Zoom, and then you can ask a question, or you can type your question in the chat box. While we're waiting for a potential question or two, I think I just want to acknowledge, I think Janine made a really interesting comment, Janine Nell, earlier around the interdependency of all of the team members, and made me think around Yolanda's comment again about being a team sport. And then Martin van Niekerk, Stuart, echoed what you've said in terms of consolidating that data, and he then talked about AI's capability and the BAs when everybody's starting, so at least getting into that lake. And I think that's where Emmanuel started us off, because if you look at the technologies we had at our disposal 20 years ago, very, very expensive, very monolithic. You had probably 3 to 5 key vendors in the industry. And today we still have these big vendors in the industry, but at least the access points and the routes into that, and especially the ability to plug in and out and get our data in these lakes have changed tremendously. Any other comment from the value conversation? I don't see any. Kerry, did I miss any hands? Is there any hands at the moment that I'm missing? I can just open my participant list. No, I don't see
not
any.
that I can see.
Okay, perfect. So ladies and gentlemen on the call, the way we work in the business school in the classroom, if you don't have questions for the audience, then the audience have questions for the lecturer, and then the lecturer have questions for you. And Maritza asked that extremely complex question, which we've tiptoed around. We didn't get into the heart of it. So be very, very careful. Angus, I'm looking at you. Loiso, Betty, Cara, I'm going to throw that question in your direction if we don't get a question coming up. But any final comments from the value perspective? I think that is something that we've all related to. And Emmanuel, if I could maybe make it more specific, you work in an environment that is extremely data-driven. Your entire business, your entire enterprise is very, very much data-driven. Is it easier to make the argument for investment into the bigger scope of technology, human development, establishing due process? Does it become easier when your company is so deeply dependent on data for its daily operations and really for its competitive edge as well?
I think yes. I think in some sectors it's so obvious that things need to be data-driven that you don't have a lot of convincing to do. And that's combined with the idea of people having the right culture. You know, if you just find yourself in a space where people have the right data culture, it gets easier versus you being in a sector where it's not obvious, the value of that is not obvious, and people don't have the right culture. It becomes harder. Yeah.
So open question for all the panelists. Yolanda, I smiled when you made a comment around people asking you, so what can we do with our data, and that you just point blankly refuse. My party trick is I'm often asked to help companies to define a digital strategy, and then I always say to them is, I don't know what a digital strategy is. I've got absolutely no idea what a digital strategy is. I know what the strategy is infused with the challenges and opportunities because of digital technologies, but I don't believe in a strategy around digital that is separate from the corporate strategy. It's like, it simply doesn't make any sense to me. I believe your strategy is infused with that. But should we have a separate data strategy? Does that ring true for that environment as well? If you go to corporate, should we be able to get a document or a living artifact or something that defines the data strategy? Or is it part and parcel of our normal strategic management processes and it's embedded within our strategic processes? Or is it a separate entity or a concept that should exist? Open mic, anybody.
Okay. Yolanda, you want to go first?
Okay, I'm going to go. Martin, I think you took the words out of my mouth. There is only one strategy, and that's the business strategy. Data, digital, people strategy, all of those are building blocks of your business strategy. So it's part of the strategic map. If you think about the analogy of sport, the Springboks have only one strategy. They have only one strategic objective, and that is to win. They have a whole bunch of they have a game plan, they have a people plan, they have a whole coaching infrastructure behind them, a whole ecosystem, and all of those moving elements have their own plans, but they're all plans for the cogs that work together to win the World Cup. So, and Maritza also talked about that. Your data strategy, I never start a data strategy unless I understand the business strategy. Because the only strategy your data has is how does it help make your business strategy successful?
Perfect, thank you. Maritza?
I'm going to say it depends. So if you're a Google or a Facebook, you're a fintech, you know, you actually started as a data-driven organization, then yes, you don't need a separate data strategy. It's already embedded in your DNA as an organization. However, if that is not the case, if you have a lower maturity when it comes to data and analytics, then I would argue that your data strategy has to be separate, aligned. It has to be aligned with your business strategy. But the risk you run if you don't have a very clearly defined data vision for your organization and a very clearly defined data strategy is that some elements of that strategy, like data governance, may be forgotten. They become hygiene factors, and they're not. They're not hygiene factors. They are a critical part and component of your data strategy. So I'm definitely going to say it depends. The one thing that I absolutely agree with Yolanda on is that we and with you, Martin, is as a data leader, and even when I was a consultant, the data strategy didn't come from me. I was a facilitator. So I facilitated the conversations. But again, it comes back to you actually have to have those conversations. The strategy starts with people. How do you know what questions you need to answer if you don't actually talk to people in the business? So you're a facilitator of the process. You are not the person where that data strategy comes from, because the ownership needs to sit in the business. The business needs to see, and your analytical community, they need to see their voice in that strategy. And every organization strategy is different because of that.
Maritza, what a fantastic point to end up. And I was sitting here and I was thinking how the argument for me, if we look at a data maturity perspective, if you are, and I'm thinking Janine made the comment earlier in terms of the data maturity as well, is if you have really reached that level of being a data mature and understanding that, then it is no longer a separate document because it's just embedded in everything that you do. But if you're at a starting point and you need to emphasize the value that sits inherent within your data because it is not yet understood through the organization, it may be important to put it on the pedestal and to say, here is something new that in an idealistic world did not have to be separate. But if we don't make it separate today and make it important, we're not going to reach that idealistic or that endpoint. So let's focus on our data strategy so that ultimately the strategy is infused with the data. That's you will see there's two chapter 17s in the book. Chapter 17A is a separate data strategy. Chapter 17B is not a separate data strategy, but it's a beautiful cohesion that emerged from that. Ladies, unfortunately, you have more than 100 witnesses to your book giving birth. Kerry, we will organize another webinar for this panel for the book launch. I'm looking forward to doing that. Stuart, a closing word from you, a closing word from Emmanuel, and then I'm handing back to you, Kerry.
Yeah, thank you. I found that discussion around strategy really, really interesting. I think that this doesn't just, I think the insight that you two provided there extends beyond data. It's about within any organization, if there is an underdeveloped, underutilized, understood, nascent component of the organization, perhaps they require raising up a little so that they're able to develop themselves and explain themselves to the rest of the organization. And that requires listening as well from both sides, which I think is an important component of it all. Always to be listening. I'd close on that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stuart. Emmanuel, you have the first word and you have the last word.
What a privilege. So, well, I will just put some more light on what was said already. You know, like there are things that any company or any organization want to achieve with data. It's very important from the beginning to know what these things are. And in that process, I think it was Yolanda who said it, the people are very important. It's very important to get the people involved into this process of defining what it is that we are about to do and achieve with data. And after you have the people involved and you have defined all your objectives, get the processes in place so that you make sure you ensure that whatever we are trying to achieve is actually feasible, and we have a way of doing that. And technology, of course, will support you. And we have said it isn't as it used to be before. Anybody can actually get a share in this today's technology stack. It's a lot of things available on the cloud. It's not very expensive. In terms of software, you have open source. So I would really encourage everybody to think about this, put the people together, processes together, and the technology is there to support you. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Maritza. Thank you, Yolanda. Thank you, Stuart. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. I'm handing back to Kerry.
Thanks, Martin. So we have got 3 minutes. So I'm going to close quickly. We are going to bring up our slides with our next webinar coming up on the 25th of August. And I just wanted to thank everybody. Obviously, a big thank you to Martin for sharing the conversation today, Yolanda, Stuart, Emmanuel, and Maritza, of course. And we'll be in touch about that book launch. So we have our next webinar on the 25th of August. It will be managed by Professor Anita Bosch. It is a very interesting topic.